Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. In this video, I'm going to do a quick review of what functions are and stuff like that, but what I mainly want to do is do a video about how to take a problem and break it down into multiple functions to solve it. But first, I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what is a function. Okay, so I'm going to just use strictly arrow functions. So bottom line is I can do this. I can create a variable, so we'll say const my function, my func, and then I can assign a function. I have a parentheses where I can pass information into the function. So if I want to pass in a piece of information, if I don't need to pass in any information, I just leave it empty. But think of each parameter as a placeholder for information that I haven't given to the function yet. So we'll just say, hey, placeholder 1, placeholder 2. Okay? And then I do this little arrow, and then in these curly brackets, I put the instructions of what the function will do. So generally what your function should do in the end is give something back. It can only give one piece of information back. That's what it's, and we signify what that piece of information is with return. So I'm going to say it returns to me 1 plus 2. That's what this function does. It takes whatever I gave it, adds them together. So if I do console.log, okay, 1, 2. Oh wait, actually I have to use the function. So I'm going to console.log the result of the function. So inside console.log, I'm going to pass in the function. Now if I do this, see if I just put the name of the function in there like that, I'm not actually using the function. I'm not invoking the function. So watch what happens. See, I just get a console log that that variable, my func, is a function. That's great, but I wanted to actually use the function. So you always have to put the parentheses, even if they're empty. Without the parentheses, the function is not invoked. But since I know this function has two parameters, I can pass in 2 arguments. So the first argument I'm going to pass in is 1. The second one I'll pass in is 2. So 1 gets passed into the function, takes the place of 1. 2 gets passed into the function, taking the place of 2. And this becomes 1 plus 2. Save. So now when I run, I should get back 3. And 3. There's 3. Okay, so this is a function at its basic. Again, I can pass in as many, I can create as many of these little slots as I want. At the end of the day, I can only return one value. So I'll return the result of this expression in this case. And then I can do as much stuff in between as I want. So a function can be really long and complicated. But let's say I wanted to create a number, a function that prints every odd number between 2 numbers. Okay? Well, there's 2 things that are happening here. 1, I need to determine whether something is an odd number. And 2, then I'm going to loop over and print numbers. So I'm going to do, instead of doing one big process, I should probably break that down into its separate pieces. Which means I would first create a function that checks whether something's an odd number or not. So I would create a variable, const check if it's odd. And we'll say this takes in a number, because we're just trying to see if any particular number is even or odd. Okay. And basically what we're going to do is just return a Boolean expression, whether it's true or false. So we'll say if num modulus 2, because technically if num modulus 2 equals 0, it's an even number. So if it's anything else, it's odd. So num modulus 2, if that equals not equals 0, because if it's not 0, then it's odd. So then that's true. Okay, so let's test out that function. So now my console log, let's see. So you always do one piece at a time and then test it out. So check odd. Is the number 5 odd? That should be true. Save. Cool. True. Okay, nice. So that number is true. Very nice. Okay, now I want to make the function that gives me prints all the odd numbers between 2 numbers. Okay, so I'm going to create a separate function. So I'm going to do that on a separate line. Const check or print odds equals, and I'm going to take in two parameters because I want to have a starting and an ending number. So we'll just call it start and end because that just makes sense. You can call it whatever you want. That's the beauty of the parameters. They're just placeholders that you get the name to make it easier for you to think through what you're doing. So I have two placeholders. I expect that the first number that's given to me is my starting number, and the second number is my end number. So I pass that in there, and I'm going to say that let x. Actually, we'll just do it this way. For x equals start, and then long as x is less than or equal than end, and these need to be semicolons. I plus plus. So it's going to go through every number between those 2 points. Okay, but I only want to print it if it's a number. If it's an odd number. So I just basically say if, and then we have to put a Boolean expression there, and here's where I'll use my check odd function. I'll use a check odd x, so whatever our current number is, check it, and it'll return true or false, because that's what this function does. It returns true or false based on whether it's an odd number or not. And if it's true, we will console.log x. Okay, and then that's it. So now, if I hit save, I can now say, hey, give me print odds. I want every odd number between 50 and 100. Save. Okay. Oh, I made a mistake somewhere. Let's see here. Print reference error. I is not defined. Where did I put I? Oh, here. How to have it. X. Okay. X plus plus. So let's save. And there you go. See every odd number. Now I got undefined because technically I never returned a value. So technically I don't even need this console log. I can get rid of that. Because there's no return value for console log to log. So for print odds, see, print odds never returns a value, so there's nothing I can really get from it. It just does a thing. Okay, and there you go. Cool. Okay, a couple of little neat tricks you can do is you can name default values. So if by default I want to make sure that this is like, you know, if someone doesn't put in a number, that there's always a start and an end, I'll just say, hey, this is by default 0, and this, just by doing an equal sign, and then, but this is by default 100. So if I don't put anything in there, so if I were this to take out these arguments, I pass in no arguments, this just means it'll default to 0 and 100. Save. Okay, and see, it gives me all the numbers between 1 and 100, even though I passed nothing in, because I set default values. Neat. Okay, cool. Now, this is a quick other idea called closure. Okay, the idea of closure just means that the data inside the function is not available outside the function. So let's just create a function called const closure test. Okay, and this will equal a function. And in this function, I'm going to define a variable, const x equals 5. Okay, if I just do that, that's literally the whole function. I'm not returning any values. I'm not returning nothing. Okay, that x does not exist outside the function. So if I were to try the console.log x, it won't let me because x doesn't exist outside of the function, and this console log is outside of the function. So let me just fix that. X. Save. See, x is not defined. X doesn't exist. But what if I do want to at least, what if there are certain things I do want you to do with x from outside the function? Well, you can do is you can take advantage that it is available, that x does exist inside the function, and define a function, or define multiple functions inside. So what I'll do is I'm going to create two functions inside the closure test function. Okay, usually I would unless you're purposely trying to take advantage of closure, I would generally resist defining a function inside of another function. But for this purpose, we are going to do that. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return an array of functions. Okay, because I could just define the two functions and then return an array of those two values, which actually probably will make it a little bit more clear, so I will do that. So here we'll say const get x, we'll call it. This will actually get us the value of x. So this will just be a function, and all this does is return the value of x. Okay, that's literally all that does. Just returns us x. And then we'll have const add x, which just will allow us to increase x by 1. All this does is it takes no parameters, takes no arguments, and it'll just add 1 to x. That's all it does. Okay? Save. Nope. And then what I'm going to return is an array that with these two functions in it. Add x. There we go. So basically these two functions are coming back in an array. Okay, cool. So again, I can't console log x, but what I can do is if I do this, so we'll just say first, we'll do it in a couple different ways. So const, okay, results, the result of the closure test function equals closure test, and we'll invoke the function. Okay, so now what happens is that when this function runs, it's going to return the array with the two functions, which gets stored in results. So technically first I'll console log that array so you can see it. Console.log results. So technically the first thing in that array should be that get x function, so I should be able to use it like that. So I should be able to do results, results 0, and then put two parentheses to invoke the function that's in there. Okay, just like that. Even though, again, that kind of looks ugly, and I'll show you how to make it prettier. But if I run it, see, I have an array with two functions. See, there's the array with the two functions, get x and add x. And then I used get x, and I got 5. So I was able to actually print 5 from outside of the context of closure tests, from outside of the function, because the function I'm using was defined inside the function. Okay? Again, I wouldn't necessarily make this your go-to way of doing things unless you have a really good reason to do it, which is generally because there's just some piece of data that you need. The function has to do something to create this piece of information, and then you need functions to manipulate that information, so that kind of situation, which shouldn't come up super often. Okay, so this is not something I would be playing with a whole bunch, but let me just show you how we can get those two functions out of there a little bit simpler using destructuring. So I could use array destructuring. So instead of just putting it in one, just letting that whole array go into one variable called results, I could use array destructuring and create a variable called getX and a variable called addX. Okay. So instead of having a results variable, I just have those two functions now outside of the function. And see, we can console log getX so we can see what x is. Then afterwards, I will use addX so you can see that it actually adds 1, and then we'll console log the getX function again, or the result. And again, I need to put the parentheses to invoke it, or else it won't work. Again, you always got to put the parentheses to use the function. Again, you always have to ask yourself, do I just want to show that it is a function? Am I trying to use the function as a value, or use the function as an action? If I need to do something, I need parentheses. Cool, let's see what I made a mistake here. Assignment to a constant variable. That's right, my mistake here is that x is a const. Can't change it if it's a const. So let's fix that. Save. And there you go. You see I add 5. And then, well, first we had 5, so that's this line here. And see, I'm actually printing x from in here, but from outside. Why? Because I was given these two functions that were originally inside. They were sent back outside by this return. So now I have those two functions to play with. So now I can add 1, and I'm still playing with this variable that's just kind of hanging out inside this instance of the function. If I were to do closure test again, it creates a new x. Every time I run the function closure test, it creates a new sort of context, a new bubble with an X inside of it. That gives me 2 functions back. So again, every time you run the function, it's a separate bubble. It's like a separate time that it ran the function. So everything is part of that time. It does take a while to appreciate that. This is actually a very advanced topic, but long is you kind of get the idea. The main thing to appreciate about functions is, again, parameters and arguments and being able to return a value. Okay, and with that, I'm going to leave that there. And you guys have a great day and enjoy.